Hi everyone, welcome to $5 Movie Bin. Professor Manon, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a special guest. This week we watched Mad Max Fury Road. It's a 2015 Australian post-apocalyptic action film directed and co-written by George Miller. In this film, a woman rebels against a tyrannical ruler in search for her homeland with the aid of a group of female prisoners, a psychotic worshipper, and a drifter named Max. This film is highly praised. It has over 230 nominations and wins, and it won 6 Oscars alone. So clearly, this is a highly praised film. Usually we just start off with what we thought. So anyone want to take it first?
I'll go first. So I know Ava, Nicole, and I agreed that we just overall really disliked this movie. It was just gratuitously violent. I'm not entirely sure for good reasons either. Like, I think sometimes films can use violence, like we were talking about Saw before we started recording. Like, violence is the whole gimmick. Like, that's its thing. Like, it's meant to be. It's a film about violence, but this I don't think was trying to be a film about violence. It was trying to be about saving these women and bringing them to a better life, and yet that was kind of, at least in my opinion, hidden by violence.
Can I ask something about just that specific idea? So, like, gratuitous violence. Are there films that you would say are gratuitously violent that you do like? Like, do you enjoy slasher films? Would be like one good way.
I haven't watched many, so probably not. But then again, I think that's the point of a slasher film. That's right. It's meant to be gross, and it's meant to make you nervous and weird you out, I guess. But I don't think that was the point necessarily. That was the overall point of this film.
Because this film is gross.
No, I would agree.
There's no getting around it.
Yeah.
I would agree with Flora, where there are movies such as Saw and other horror movies where violence is the whole thing. And if I watch a movie like that I'm expecting it, and that's what it's based around, so I'm not as bothered by it. But when it's in a movie that is trying to portray other messages and they add all this excessive violence, sometimes it kind of takes me out of it, because it's hard to focus on all the other stuff when sometimes you need to close your eyes, where in slasher films, there's no like giant plot points where if you close your eyes, you're going to like miss an important symbolic detail. But I don't know. In this, I feel like they could have toned it down a little or made it a little less gross, because personally, it took me out of it a little bit, where I wasn't as into the film because I just was distracted by how violent it was.
So Ava, what's an example of that? So like, what was a moment where the gratuitous violence took you out of it?
Probably when they were okay. There at the beginning, there was all these explosions and people were like, there were like bodies flying in the air, and I was like, that's just so violent and also like so obviously CGI. It kind of took me out of it as a real world than thinking about the actual concepts.
I mean, it strikes me that this is a film where people are getting blinded left and right, like it's no big deal.
Yeah.
Like just numerous people are getting blinded, and you're seeing their like empty eye sockets, that kind of thing. I mean, that's, it's gratuitous, like it's flat out gratuitous and gross. And at a certain point, you actually kind of think, okay, could another person be blinded here? Like it just like how many people is too many people to blind in one movie? And so that aspect of it, I think, like it's the heaping of violence on top of violence that's kind of like cartoonish. I mean, and that's an interesting word to apply to this film. This is very much like a comic book. Like it looks like a cartoon. And usually that's not a good thing. So, when you say something's cartoonish, that's usually a pejorative. It's not something you would praise a film for.
Right. speaking of cartoonish, that just reminded me of something else I kind of didn't like. There was a lot of like supervillain monologuing going on, right? Like there was that one scene where they were in that muddy blue area that used to be the green place, and one of the guys went blind, and he just started like shouting about like having true sight or whatever. And I don't know, it was very cartoony. Didn't feel real once again, but as we were discussing, I think before, the movie pairs this sort of familiar objects with a lot of just fiction. Yeah.
I wonder, is the problem that the film is at odds with itself? So like it's not so much a question of so yeah, there are films that can have gratuitous violence, and we know what those films are, and there's certain genres, and we go to those films for that reason. And when they're gratuitously violent, then that's part of the fabric of the film and everything's. But the problem here is that on the one hand, like it's not, it doesn't seem like the genre fits the level of violence. In some ways that's out of skew. And even in this case of like superhero monologuing, like that's perfectly fine in an Avengers film. So why is it not fine in this film? And I think it's again because it feels like the film is at odds with itself in a certain way, doesn't cohere in a certain way.
For me, it felt way too fast paced to cohere. That's just in my opinion. I found it very overstimulating as opposed to any other post-apocalyptic action film you would get. I'm thinking a lot about YA books turned into films, and watching the films that like I would read in a book when I was 11 or 12, and a lot of them had a plot line, like a really detailed plot line with many small Easter eggs. In this world, you're just thrown right into it, and you like I feel like I could have gone and read like 4 views after this and still have had needed time to process everything. So I think that is what makes it so difficult to kind of catch up with and understand. It's just you're right in that world as soon as you start the movie.
Yep.
Right. It lacks world building, right? Like
Yeah.
it's just the world is the way it is, and then you're thrown into it.
Yeah.
Is that because we haven't seen any of the prequels though? Like, because I feel like I haven't seen any other movies, so
Yeah.
I've
just
seen
curious
them
why.
all, and I've seen all of them sort of in their time, and it doesn't help.
Okay.
I don't think it helps in the sense that the previous films like establish that this world exists, and that like gasoline's a scarce commodity, and that people are kind of living in this weirdly like nomadic, completely marginal life, that there used to be civilization and now there's not. None of that helps. I don't think that, and even Max, like he's not the same actor. He's not the same, doesn't seem like the same character. So it feels like a reboot for sure.
And then they're drinking mother's milk all together. That was the one
weird.
thing that really threw me for a loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't as like gross as it was disturbing. Like that there is a society where they would milk people. It's more
limit
like
water too. Like don't get addicted to water.
Yeah.
Like that's a universal like thing. Everyone drinks water. Why are we keeping it from these people? And that's also the world building, the whole world building thing, not understanding that right off the bat.
It was weird because they kept like wasting so much water. Like when they like first they pour the water out, like those big tubes or whatever, it went everywhere. And that one scene when those like the women are like washing themselves off with a hose just doesn't make any sense, because like if water's so valuable, why would you be so like careless with it?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. When all the women are just like carelessly using the hose and like not even turning it off and just putting it on the ground. Like
all I was going to say is I wonder if that is on purpose though, right? Because those women were treated better than the rest of the people. I mean, that's better in like that they had their desires met to a certain extent, right? Like they had a nice open air area where there was like greenery and stuff. But like, obviously they were all like horrifically assaulted and things like that. But I think
Mhm.
the subtext of the movie is they're taken care of because they're his wives. So I wonder if water isn't as much of a rarity to them.
I mean, I would agree with you, but then Furiosa is there as well, and she's
Right.
with them, and I thought
Yeah,
she
that's
might have
right.
stopped them, but she doesn't.
You're right.
Every time I see the scenes of like these motorcycles flying across the desert and all these cars that obviously use a huge amount of fuel to get around, I keep thinking to myself, like, where's the fuel? Like,
Mhm.
where is the fuel?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So is there a fuel vehicle? I know this is like one of those stupid technical things that people point out in films, but like, isn't there a fuel truck that goes along with the gigantic caravan of cars that's driving across the desert for hours and hours and hours and
Right.
many, many miles?
Mhm.
Like, where does the gas in the previous films? Gas was the scarce commodity, and here it's water.
Mhm.
But like, we just, it's like gas magically just appears in the tanks of all these vehicles, and we never have to think
Yeah.
about that. And it just doesn't. I mean, as somebody who's got like a certain level of weird irrational nervousness about running out of gas when I'm driving in my car, like the whole film has me on edge about like, so when that, like when the tanker or when the war machine like breaks down, or we hear it sputtering when Tom Hardy's driving it, and then all of a sudden it stops, and we find out that's because there's a kill switch in it. I'm thinking to myself, well, he's run out of gas. Like, why didn't they think of
Yeah,
that?
that's what
Why
I
didn't they
thought.
think of that when they left? It just seems bizarre that that's just never addressed. And I think that points to the fact that this really is like, there's a theme in this film about scarcity and abundance, and the film's playing games with that. So it's showing you like gigantic abundance. So it's not just like they let a trickle of water in from a spring someplace. No, they gush water out on these people through these two gigantic pipes. And so they've got all the water, and then they've got none of the water. They've got all the milk in that truck, and then they've got none of it. And it just seems like that kind of binary between scarcity and abundance is like, that's a, like when I read quickly through the Wikipedia write-up, and like all Wikipedia write-ups, it seems like pretty moronic. Like, it's not like it's exactly what you expect from sort of least common denominator. Like, it's people offering the most basic opinion possible, and like the themes they point out are like feminism is a theme. Okay, like that's not the most obvious thing in the world, and in some ways, like, I think if you were to point to the fact that it's this binary of scarcity and abundance, like at least that gets you in the direction of understanding the film's look, its aesthetic. It's, we talked a little bit, and maybe we should talk more now about the aesthetic of the film, which strikes me as kind of like, it's the world, it's the not so distant past. So like, I grew up in the 70s, so it's like, to me, this film looks a little bit like the rawness of the 1970s as viewed from the 2000 teens. So like, if you, and this is just I'm just gonna throw my old man hat into the ring here, like, how like nice looking a Starbucks is, like places just didn't look like that in the 70s. They really didn't. That polished, slick appearance that seems so easy to crank out through like inkjet printing and and like foam core board and like certain types of paint. I mean, that aesthetic that you expect from any like retail establishment in the 2000 teens, like in the 70s, was much more ad hoc, much more hacked together, put together by average people. It didn't look that fancy. It didn't look that like clean and kempt. And sure, yeah, if you went to New York or Paris, you might, but even like New York in the 70s was a raw place. And to me, this film looks like the not so distant past as viewed from the tidy present. And in a lot of ways, like, it strikes me as a kind of like, what would be the word for this? Like, how people do these like ruin porn, like Tumblrs and stuff, where, you take a bunch of pictures of like, you go to like some abandoned hospital and take pictures of it. Like, this film kind of has that aesthetic. It feels like a kind of tourism into like, I don't know, salvage yards, and a kind of like rough, like another thing that strikes me about this film is it's like a factory aesthetic. Like any steel mill in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s looked just as bad as this film looks in every scene. But those are real places, right? Like, people work in really shitty places. And this film makes that sort of something that you're being entertained by, that aesthetic. I don't know.
Sorry, this is just something that came to me. So I think the setting in itself kind of mimics the that theme of abundance and like nothing. Like I forget the exact wording you use, but right. So we're in the middle of this desert, and there's absolutely nothing for miles and miles and miles, and yet at the same time the coloring is incredibly vibrant. Like there's abundance and somehow both. There's abundance and it's lacking in both ways. Like the music, like even playing the drums and the electric guitar, like it's so unnecessary, but there's so much of it for this desolate environment.
There's something that I find very interesting about the use of blue and the use of orange, kind of, in the same realm. I took a class my junior year of high school, and it was just kind of like an intro to film studies. And my teacher told me to look out for blue and orange in any post-apocalyptic action film. Something about it feels robotic almost. Like unworldly, and you're slapped across the face with blue and orange and browns. So that was something that really struck me. I'm also really interested in just looking at color and setting and whatnot. So that stood out to me the most, and that along with texture. We were talking a little about texture before we started, just how grotesque this is and how disgusting and dirty it makes it feel raw, like nothing's kept back. So color and texture, I think, all play a role, especially with the violence that we see. It really kind of goes hand in hand.
And I think that those two colors, there's an old film, there's a Lars von Trier film. I don't know how I discovered this, but when I was in grad school, I found this film, 1984, called The Element of Lars von Trier. And instead of being a black and white film, it's essentially a blue and orange film. So every single color tone is some shade of like rusty orange and exactly the sort of blue color that you see in the nighttime scenes in Fury Road. And there is something about that binary, like rusty water and blue. And, there's a kind of, I guess, like a weird nostalgic harshness to it. I mean, it's just, again, it sort of seems to be playing with your expectations about like maybe like things like scarcity and abundance. But the film is saturated with orange and occasionally like these peaks of blue. And I find that, really interesting, and it's a great look. But you're right. I think there's a ton of films that do that. Isn't Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Is a film that's kind of like all shot in like yellowish, orange tones, to give it that sepia, ancient, nostalgic quality. And so this film definitely plays that to the hilt for sure. Like when I think of this film, I think orange.
Yeah, orange and blue, they are opposites on the color wheel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, obviously it's the desert, so a lot of it's gonna. I know color is kind of, it's not a great thing to spend time talking about, but blue is supposed to be a more soothing color than right. It's supposed to have that effect on people, so we get very, very little of that. Well, I guess that makes sense because it's a desert, but the first time we see this blue, they are stuck and they're waiting. They're being chased by these people, but they are stopped, right? So there's a moment of rest, but there's increased nervousness, and then all of a sudden Max wakes up and it's the middle of the day, bright orange again. And then the second time we see this blue, it's the night, and they finally feel like they can take a breath, and that they're may or may not be, that there's some hope, that they think they're going to head across this salt plain. And so there's a moment of calm in this blue environment.
Yeah, I mean, the color is really the first thing I kind of thought of was mostly like kind of like Mars, like an alien planet, because with all the orange, the texture too of like the sand and rocks. And I thought they may have been kind of playing that into like trying to say like really portray the Earth as much more of an alien place now, since whatever crisis happened that put it apocalyptic.
But I think we should move on to our woke quota segment, and the kind of obvious subtext here, feminism. I know, Flora, you brought that up earlier, so why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Okay, so I want to introduce this subject, this topic segment. That's what it is. Carefully, because it like woke quota. We don't want to make it seem like I can't believe they put a woman in here, or like, oh, I can't believe this is a black person in this movie. Like, you know, because that's dumb and that's ridiculous. But this is more of a criticism of films that put minority characters in, or women in, and don't really fully develop their storylines and don't develop who they are as characters, or do it in a poor way where the character just serves as a stereotype, or whatever story they have is left unexplored and underdeveloped in comparison to white or male counterparts. So
Oh,
no,
sorry.
you can go, Eva.
Basically, woke quota is just pointing out obvious tokenization of putting in a person of a minority and not developing them at all. They're just there to fill a quota. Like, very obviously, the people who make the movie don't actually care about the representation as much. They more want to fill a bubble that they have to fill with minorities, which is sad, but happens in countless movies. But the main tokenization person I saw is that this is primarily a white movie, and there is one black woman or woman of color in the band of wives, and she basically has no character, no speaking roles. She has about like one moment where she like hits the main leader who's driving next to her, and he like smashes her in the head with a gun, and she just falls back.
The thing about that is, like, it's Zoe Kravitz playing this wife. Like, she's a big actress. Like, you know, she's kind of like, everyone knows Zoe Kravitz. Like, you'd think if you were going to choose someone to be a token, like, you wouldn't care about like stardom. Like, you would just be any woman would do. So it makes me wonder if like she originally had more of a role in this movie, because Zoe Kravitz would play, I think, usually a bigger character than what she did in this film. But that's just a side note. So we were talking about the messages this film was making and or trying to make, maybe unsuccessfully, about feminism, right? Furiosa, it is her story and it is her film, but she's not. It's not named after her, right? So I forgot what we were saying before. Sorry.
Well, sort of the way that Max bookends Furiosa's narrative. So it's Max at the beginning, Furiosa through the body of the film, you know, sort of through Act 2, and then Max at the end. And so it feels like, and it's shaped like, a situation in which he gets credit for her story, or he gets credit for her actions toward resolving the plot. And it's not entirely true. So I think like we can say some pretty like broad things about this, and it is more subtle than this, and there are complications that kind of need to be addressed here. But I think the big question is, is the film aware that it's doing this, and thus a critique, or is the film in some ways unaware that it's doing this, and in that way is anti-feminist? And so like that's, I think, really open for debate. Like, does the film in a sense know that, like, does it know that its title Mad Max is ironic? Because it's not ultimately like it should be Furiosa Fury Road,
right,
or something like that. And it's the fact that Mad Max is the titular character here, I think has my sense is that maybe that has a big asterisk next to it, and that the film knows this, but that's debatable.
Yeah, I think it does, just especially the IMDb page, like on like the kind of the poster of it, it says Mad Max, but then shows kind of her face in the foreground. he's kind of in the back and you can't really see his face. So I think the film knows she's much more of like the protagonist of the film and takes things much, yeah.
Right. I think it might somehow, like, I don't, maybe the film isn't completely aware of what it's doing. Like, I would agree. I think maybe the title is somewhat ironic and making fun of itself in some way, but also, like we were saying with the violence, I just feel like any message it was trying to make about, you know, women doing the work and men taking credit for it was ultimately overshadowed by just distracting, loud violence. It was really impossible, at least for me, to focus on almost anything else besides just like, oh my God, look at this. This guy is being used as a blood bag. So I don't know. I think the only nod towards the film's irony is through the title. But that could just be me. Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's think about the structure then. So what about that bookending factor that we were talking about? To sort of embed Furiosa within this larger narrative that begins and ends with Max. I mean, the message there seems to be that women do a lot of work they don't get credit for. I mean, it feels like that's what's happening in the film. So we see her do that work. It's not like that work's hidden from us, the viewer of the film. Like, we see it. And so in some ways it feels to me like the film wants to point that out, and that's much more explicit of a agenda within the film than the book ending. And the book ending seems cheap and is cheap, and the film knows it's cheap. I'm not here to, by the way, to sort of serve as an advocate for the film. I don't really care about this one way or the other. I just think it's worth thinking about, because the film, yes, certainly this is a film that's the popular wisdom about this film is that it's a feminist film. I mean, I think if we're going to say that it's not, we're bucking a trend that is pretty well established in the criticism about the film. That's not to say that you can't do that. And I also do think that the film, I think this film, people were whipped up into a frenzy about this film when it came out, and having a little distance toward it, like 6 years of distance to sort of look back on it, gives you a somewhat different perspective.
And oftentimes, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask about Tom Hardy, but go ahead, and then we'll talk about Tom Hardy later.
Yeah. So I felt a lot of awkward air between Furiosa and Max, especially when Furiosa, arrives and she meets kind of all of her sisters, and one of the women asks, like, "Oh, who are these people?" And Furiosa goes, "Oh yeah, they helped us. They helped us along the way." But did they? I mean, I don't know how, like, maybe I just like zoned out for a bit, but what much did they do? It just felt, again, with this whole women, not getting credit for their work. It was kind of framed as if Max and Nux were the reason that they were there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I just like missed something, or that's kind of how I just felt awkward air about it. It just felt odd. It didn't feel right.
That I actually kind of wanted to discuss Nux, right, and UX in this same light too. I think one of the flaws with the film's feminism, at least from my point, is Nux's like character development. Like, he's been living in a world his whole life where women are like a commodity to be owned. And then all of a sudden, this chick comes up and pets his face, and like all of a sudden, that's completely erased from him entirely. And he forgets all of that and decides that these women are worth helping and bringing them to safety and to freedom. And that feels more than anything is like, look at him. He's such a good guy. This woman showed him the tiniest bit of affection, and now he knows what's right and what's wrong. And I don't know, that didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that's the dumbest thing about this film.
Yeah.
I'm 100% with you. Like, that is where this film completely falls down. I mean, there's only one kiss in this film, and it's between the two of them, right?
Yeah.
But right before he goes to do his big heroic gesture, he kisses her, and then So I think that the cheapness of that relationship and the fact that it sort of evolves out of nowhere and all of a sudden they're actually in love.
Mhm.
How does that happen in a
Yeah.
matter of 2 days
Mhm.
when they're all starving, like sunbaked out in the salt flats? Like it really rings hollow, and it to me suggests a kind of cheap shot
Right.
that he can somehow be rescued. And I think there's where the 6 years distance really messes this up, because when I think like brainwashed people falling in line behind a dear leader figure, like I just think of MAGA and the
Mm.
whole thing. Like, so when I look back on, what are they called? The war boys, the guys all in
Yeah.
white. So I just think, this is just an army. I mean, I can't look at that outside of the context of the January 6th insurrection, for instance. And so my view on him, on Nux, is completely tainted by contemporary history in a way that it would not have been in 2015 when people saw this film in the first place.
Right. And like there was that moment, I think within like the first half an hour of the film, I don't quite remember when they were trying to kill Nux, right? But all like Furiosa was, but then like all of the wives who have seen perhaps even more than Furiosa, like just the brutality of this world, right? Because they're kept to be raped, and that's it. They're kept healthy and alive. For them to then be like, no, you have to save him. He's just I don't know, that I don't think any woman in that situation would ever argue that.
I didn't really buy into that either.
Yeah, to save what was a symbol of their imprisonment. Yeah.
I thought that was the film trying to go off of women's like gentle tendencies, which didn't make sense in that scenario, because
Right.
those would not want to save someone who is a part of the system that has been oppressing them and hurting them for so many years.
Right. Like I've seen this especially on social media where it's like it is like the oppressors or the colonizers' dream to be forgiven by the people they oppress, right? Like that is the ultimate goal. It's to ignore all of history and be welcomed with open arms and to be loved. And that's exactly what this felt like. Like, oh, it's okay. He didn't know what he was doing. He's just a boy. Yeah.
And I think like very similarly, if you want to kind of think about the way the film operates in gender terms, with Furiosa as kind of this feminist figure, you've also got to keep in mind that Furiosa's feminism is set against the backdrop of traditional gender binaries. And so the film itself is intensely binary. Like it even looks binary. So when you see the wives for the first time, they're like perfectly clean, mostly naked, crawling around this like gnarly looking, terrible truck, right? And so that binary of sort of masculine, feminine in the most traditional sorts of ways is enforced in the film. And then when Furiosa bucks that trend and kind of does this thing that brings together the masculine side and the feminine side, it's still a very binary gesture. In other words, so
Yeah.
Furiosa is doing this thing that is sort of like proves the rule by exception. So Furiosa is the exception, but the rule is just the rest of the film. The whole rest of the film obeys this kind of like ancient nostalgic binary presentation of gender. And so I think in that way, like, yeah, maybe. So really the tail of the tape is the relationship between Nux and the redheaded wife, right? And that's the tell. That's the poker player's tell. That's the way that's your little insight into the fact that this film is not feminist.
Like Mad Max is not a meet cute. There's no it can't be. There's no way.
Right. So let me say something pretty provocative here and just see, because we didn't talk about this before we started, but I think it's worth saying. I think this is a terrible Tom Hardy performance, like to the point that just when I hear his voice, I get irritated. And I don't know why that is. Like it's something about how his softness of speech in all this, the way his voice sort of wafts into these scenarios and just says these comforting little things toward the end to various people. And I just find him and the look on his face, we constantly get this cut to this same look on his face, and it's this look of sort of genuineness and concern about what's going on. That's not the case in the first half of the film, but like later on, especially after they visit the matriarchal community, like suddenly he's full of concern, and I just think it's bullshit. Like there's something about it that strikes me as, again, hollow, and it feels to me like a tell. The film's revealing what it really thinks, and it's just, you know, you can't have this Mad Max character. Like Mad Max is supposed to be a tough guy, and suddenly we see him in this caring, sort of like benevolent face on everything, and it just strikes me as phony. And I also just think it's terribly performed. And I know people love Tom Hardy, right? He's considered like world-class actor for a lot of reasons and because of a lot of roles. And if you saw this film by itself and said, what do you think of Tom Hardy as an actor? I defy anybody. Like if this is your only evidence, you just think, well, this guy's a hack.
Yeah. Just about Tom Hardy's performance, there was this one moment right before like the head wife died, like when she tucked herself in and he gave her like a thumbs up. I wanted to scream. Yeah. That was so weird. It was so entirely unnecessary. Like smiled at her. It like, oh, good job on surviving. Good job, girlie. You did it. You didn't get smushed.
It felt like an awkward meet cute moment.
Yeah,
like I'm telling you, Mad Max is trying to be a meet cute, and it's not. Yeah. It needs to stop.
Well, like not only that, she like directly looked at him for like the validation that she wanted before surviving.
You're right. You're
she
right.
survived, and she was like, "Hey," and she looked at him, and he was like, "Cool."
Yeah.
Good job.
It makes sense.
You know, that's actually
if in a survival situation.
This is a terrific angle on this film. Like if you wanted to develop a pretty interesting argument about this film, you could end with the premise that this is the least cute film ever made, but weirdly, it involves all these super cute little touches at certain moments. And I'm not talking about just stuff like the thumbs up, because I think that's cute, but also like even like the guitarist on the front. Like that's a cute little, that's a cutesy little move. I mean, I realize he's grotesque and he's playing heavy metal and doing, but it's kind of this cute little accoutrement in the midst of this like craziness that's going on. And the film is full of that stuff. The stupid steering wheels on all the vehicles, they all have these little cute like designs and stuff. It's like a craft project, right? I mean, it's kind of, I don't know what exactly to compare it to. It reminds me of like shows that you see on like networks, you know, that dedicated to like producing crafts and scrapbooking and stuff like that. Like this film is full of all this kind of, all those cars are way over detailed. Like, you know, that one scene where somebody's sort of tracing their finger across the insignia, the line. Who the hell has the time to hand stamp the interior ceiling of a car with this elaborate pattern? Like, what are you people doing out there in the desert? Like, it's just bonkers. And so I think this film is like weirdly too cute for its own environment. And I think that's a great way in to understanding what this film's up to.
This wasn't necessarily like a cutesy moment, but it struck me as a tropey moment where whenever one of like the main band died, all the women would like scream, or people would scream and like grieve. But when Nux died and he was like, "Witness me," they were all like, "How heroic." No one screamed. They just watched him die and were like, "Cool, man. That was cool of you." And like even the redheaded girl who he was in a relationship with had no reaction. She didn't like scream. And that just struck me as like, when the head wife died, everyone was screaming and telling them to turn around. When he died, they were just like, "What can you do?
What are you going to do?"
I think it has something to do with sacrifice, right? I think where they were like, he died for us, for our beautiful lives, so we could have a future and we can hope. Like it just, I don't know, it felt very hero-y to me. Like he's our superhero. That's what superheroes do.
I think it also takes away from any feminist theme you're trying to put into it, because in the end, they only got away because of this male savior who died for them.
You know, Nux has this the sort of key bodily insignia for him. So there's Slit, who's got the Joker style slit mouth. And then Nux, of course, has these cancerous growths on his neck. And it's got the ultimate, this is a Worcester connection here. It's got the ultimate cute detail, which is that he's put a smiley face on him.
Yeah.
Like he's used a ballpoint pen or whatever to put a smiley face on his growths.
That's another cute thing he did. He named them. He called them his friends.
He had names. I can't remember the names, but they had two names, right?
Yeah.
And so again, like I think it's a kind of bringing together, it's a conflation of the cute and the grotesque, and this film is all about that. Although I don't think that's how you think of this film. Like I think if you sort of recall, if you've seen this film 4 or 5 years ago, you think, yeah, this is a very grotesque, gritty film. Actually, no, like there's this kind of weird, cute core to this. And I think that's, yeah, the more I think about it, that's a super interesting inroad. I would be willing to bet too that no one has ever said that. So like there's a paper to write, you know, write a paper about how cuteness and the grotesque function in this film.
Mm-hmm. And
oh, you can go, Nicole.
Okay. I just wanted to mention Max and Nux's relationship. It felt very hero sidekick. You know, literally kind of 15-30 minutes into the movie, Max is dragging Nux around, and you know, while you know Nux isn't really doing anything, he's kind of like dead for just a little bit or knocked unconscious. It feels like Nux is just kind of this witty light that gives to the hero Max, not necessarily the hero, but there's this kind of relationship between the two of them that's not so obvious. But when we talk about these cutesy moments, like I started thinking there's definitely some form of wit and brilliance in between the two of them.
There's also kind of father-son, mother-daughter stuff going on in this film.
Yeah.
So, Max and Nux are son pair, and Furiosa and the wives are sort of mother-daughters kind of relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, okay, we've already talked about like the title of this film, but like and like how it should, you know, be called Furiosa, Fury Road. But I was just thinking about the title Mad Max, and that probably applied to the earlier films, but like Tom Hardy isn't like insane in this. Like nothing he's doing is particularly mad or like zany or off the wall. Like he's being weird and silent and brooding and doing what it takes to survive. I don't know if you can call that mad or crazy. I don't know, but that really bothered me. I don't know why, but him earning that title of insane.
It does. The film does this thing that I'm not sure that I love, and I've been watching the series on what's it on HBO Max, The Flight Attendant. Do you know this thing with Kaylee Cuoco? I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, but it's good. It's actually really intense. But it does the same thing that Mad Max does, which is that it does this. Anytime it wants to get you inside Max's head, it literally just shows you what he's thinking. So we see the little girl being run over by a truck, and we see these like bloody eyes coming at him. And so you see like his psychotic vision of things. And that's Flight Attendant does this to the point of distraction. Like we're endlessly seeing her like psychotic little meltdowns, and we see him through her eyes. But the thing about that is like, it's not a very good, like from a screenwriting perspective, it's not a good move, because it's kind of like you're taking show don't tell too literally. So like show don't tell means show us how a character feels through their action. It doesn't mean show us through how a character feels by showing us like a little movie of what's going on in their head. And that always strikes me as kind of a cheap, and it happens again and again. And the only person who experiences that, of course, is Max. And so in a sense, that's how you know it is the film thinks it's his film, when in fact Furiosa is the one that's bearing the burden of, like, as we said, the work of Act 2 is all on her shoulders. I think it's funny too that the title of the film is Mad Max Fury Road. It should be called Mad Max Furiosa, because that's what the film is. You know, it's like her film. The film's doesn't have the guts the title obviously makes no sense, but the film doesn't really have the guts to call itself that. So it comes up with this other way of saying the same thing, I guess.
Who knows at this point?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Can I point something else out with like the insanity aspect? Is that's not affected by him at all, but the entire society is based around that no one has any fear of death. All of these war boys throw themselves into death situations and say, "Witness me," and like cheer for each other as they have brutal deaths, because they have some idea instilled in them that when they die, they live again in some afterlife where they're treated as heroes. So it's not actually death. But it bothered me because Max isn't like that and wants to preserve his life, but like everybody else is like that. And if you want to call anyone else like has an aspect of insanity, it's the war boys who've been brainwashed to think this way. Also,
Right.
what bothered me about Nux's character development is that he went from this aspect of insanity of being so willing to die to completely getting rid of that right away.
Yeah, I didn't follow how he all of a sudden became an ally at all. I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Right.
He went from flooding his car with gasoline to try to blow it up
And
to
kill,
to as like a suicide bomber, to just being like, okay, I'll be on your team now. Cool.
By the way, incidentally, I just want to point this out in case you ever decide to flood your car with gasoline. Like, that's not how gasoline works. So
Yeah.
you've got gasoline on the floor of your car and you light a flare up here, you're blowing up. Like,
Yeah,
it's the fumes.
Yeah.
The gasoline fumes are what ignites. So that, it's not like just keeping the flare away from the liquid is going to stop you from blowing up.
Yeah.
Minor point, but like it's kind of funny how the film is so intensely dedicated to practical effects and making things look realistic, and then also has these gigantic logical flaws related to physics and I don't know, just how like air works. That kind of stuff goes right out the window pretty quickly.
No, I was
Telling
thinking
me-
that during that scene, like as soon as he lit the fuse, I was like, why is the car not blown up yet?
Yeah.
Right.
Because holding it above it.
He lived 5 feet away from a giant pool of gas. Like, it's over.
I was gonna go flood my car with some gas, so thank you for telling me.
Good. Yeah,
before
I knew that
did.
was probably in your plans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nicole, I was going to too, so I'm glad
Oh
we're
my
not going to do that
goodness.
anymore.
Yeah. Good to know.
So silly of us.
Oh, the things kids pick up from movies.
Right.
So unrealistic.
And maybe that's a good way to kind of round things out. Like, so the film is famous for its practical effects. So this is not unlike Christopher Nolan's films. This is a film where like many of these explosions and car chases and crashes were achieved using real vehicles out in the salt flats or out in, I don't know where the hell they shot this, out in some desert someplace, probably in Australia. And that is part of the appeal of this film, because it bucks the trend of big budget CGI blockbusters where you look at the images and that it never happened in front of the camera. So part of what's thrilling about this is it's almost like going to a monster truck show at some arena someplace and seeing like actual danger happening in front of your face. Like, part of the thrill of a film like this is knowing that stunt people and people who are experts on explosions and car design and so forth really did their homework and did their work on this film. And so what you're seeing like largely did take place in front of the camera. But that said, I think the film, I don't know, it puts the film in a really weird space, because some CGI is employed, like some pretty obvious stuff happens with CGI and you just kind of have to excuse it. Some of the CGI is terrible. Like, there's some really badly done, like fake CGI, and it's set in high relief by the fact that there's so many practical effects in the film. And I just think it's like a film that, it sort of lives and dies, or it stands and falls based on our ability to sort of get into this story world as a realistic story world. And so the stakes of realism here are enormously high. And so when the film takes you out of that, or if you feel like you're being sort of betrayed, or the realism's being betrayed in a certain way, it hurts extra bad. Unlike any Marvel film where you just kind of know that like 90% of what you're seeing on screen is a CGI effect, and it was all trumped up in front of a green screen to begin with. So I think this film kind of stands alone in this regard. There's very few films that kind of attempt this, and it's tough. The film kind of establishes a pretty high bar for itself, and when it fails, it's pretty obvious.
I'd actually, as like a comparison, for some, I don't know, as a comparison to this movie, in what you're saying would be The Walking Dead, where a lot of their effects, I mean, the deaths are obviously CGI, but a lot of their effects are people in SFX as zombies walking around. And there's one particular scene which was very, very similar to a scene in Mad Max, where there's a big explosion and you saw bodies flying in it, and it takes you out of it because you're committed to the realism of what the show is giving you, and then it's just something that's so obviously fake that you're just taken out of it.
Yeah. I've written a little bit about this, but there's a scene in the Terrence Malick film Tree of Life where, now let me see if I've got this right. I think you see a dinosaur. So this film is like this beautifully shot film, and people have all sorts of, it's a love it or hate it sort of film. But there's this one CGI shot of a dinosaur sort of someplace in the middle of the film. And for me, it's just like horrible. Like it's appallingly out of place in a film that's otherwise just pro-filmic photography. Like camera shoots these beautiful scenes and actors doing what actors do, and it's all fantastic. And then we get this CGI. So I just think the stakes of this, the stakes of the use of CGI are enormously high in films. And when you start playing that dividing line between what's CGI and what's real, and start kind of messing with that, you got to be just incredibly careful as a filmmaker, because we tend to think, yeah, this is all about the story. But boy, like at the level of aesthetics, I think people can judge pretty well what's real and what's fake. And if suddenly you feel like, oh, that was fake, it's tragic for the film. And I think you just kind of, and it's kind of tragic for you as a viewer, because now, your sense of reality and your suspension of disbelief is messed with. You can't go back. It's like once you know how the trick works, you can't go back to believing in the illusion. And it's just, the stakes I think are unbelievably high. And this is a film that's a great test case for that.
Oh goodness. I guess we can try Spot the Clarky now. If
we can, we could always do,
how?
We could do our rate it from $1 to $5.
Yeah. So anyone want to introduce that? I mean, there's not really much to, but
I don't know. Bart's the Clarky. Hi, Bart.
Yeah, Bart's the Clarky in this movie. I can't. Yeah.
Yep.
Nope. Nothing.
Yep, nope.
Nothing. This is the first time we haven't had a Clarky.
Let me ask you about how much would you pay thing. Would you have paid more in 2015 than you would pay today to see it?
No.
Yes.
Probably.
I don't know.
I don't think it's really my genre personally, so I wouldn't pay too much to see it. I feel like I would have gone and checked it out in theaters.
Exactly.
And then
that's what
okay,
I would have paid
cool.
it for.
Yeah, I would have paid
Yeah.
$8.15 and then seen it, but then
Yeah, I think that's a big deal too. I think this is a movie that absolutely demands to be seen on a big screen, and anything less than that kind of loses half the experience. This is a roller coaster ride, like like a video game that you're being subjected to in giant, high def color and sound. I would pay the full $5 to see this, and it has nothing at all to do with a lot of the issues we discussed. Like, I think what this film sets out to do and what it does, like, it absolutely nails what it sets out to do. And then, then you can have all these great discussions afterwards about, the meaning of the film, the feminist impulse in the film, and whether it's genuine or not. Like, it's a rich film. It's not, there is a there, how people will talk about there's no there. Like, there's definitely a there. Like, there's plenty of meat on the bones of this film to talk about a lot. And I think to me, that's a winner. Whereas like Home Alone 2, no.
That movie was just
Home Alone 3.
Three, sorry.
That was a
Big
roller
difference.
coaster.
Even
Different
less.
actors.
Yeah,
Even less.
that was in its own realm.
Oh, yeah.
That one.
I remember my sister came in the room when I was watching that, and it was towards the end when all the pranks were being pulled, and she was like, what would the kid do if somebody died? Would he be charged with manslaughter?
Life in prison. Oh, poor kid.
Life in prison.
But yeah, I would probably only pay, if I were to get it out of a $5 movie bin, I would definitely not pay the $5 for it. I would probably be closer to like $2.50 if I had to throw a price on it for myself. Ethan, I know you liked.
I'll
I
pay
know
a solid $4 for it. It was okay.
Oh,
It was entertaining. Like, I don't love it, but it was kind of entertaining. And I'll pay a solid $4 for it.
So what's a straight up 5 then?
We
For all
haven't
of
had
them.
one yet.
But I mean just in life. Like what would be what's a film that you absolutely positively would pay $5 to see?
Well, I guess it depends on the different genres that we prefer.
I think that's a dodge. I'm just asking for like a
I don't
title. Just give me a title.
oh man.
Truman Show. I'll pay $5 for that.
Truman
That's it.
Show.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't seen The Truman Show, but it's on
I
my
like it.
list.
I haven't seen it.
Like Godfather?
Yeah, I'd pay $5 for Godfather.
Yeah.
For me,
Yeah.
I don't care if it's a bad movie because obviously I like watching them. I find them entertaining.
Yeah.
And I would pay for them, but it has to be bad in an entertaining way.
Yeah.
Me. If it's just bad, and I can't get into it, then I don't want to pay a full $5 for it. I want to be entertained.
Also, to answer the what constitutes a $5 movie, like a full price movie, for me it would be old classics. Casablanca, Citizen Kane, Psycho. I think I would pay a solid $5 for those.
Yep.
Yeah, there are different kinds of $5 movies. Like there's obviously the really like shitty ones, but then there's also I think The Truman Show. I don't think The Truman Show is a bad movie at all. I love The Truman Show, but I think it's still worth $5. It's just an energy about it that makes it worth $5.
Oh, you want to hear a dirty joke?
Yeah.
Okay.
We are a PG channel, Nicole. I don't know what kind of viewers you think we have.
2 white horses stepping in mud.
There you go.
That's
Very
a dirty
good.
joke.
That's a dirty joke.
So
There you
funny.
go.
Oh, I get it.
Ugh, painful.
That was a good one.
Wait.
Here's one for you. What's brown and sticky?
A stick.
A stick.
Good.
I've
Laura thinks
never
that's
heard that before. Yeah, it's really funny.
Thank you for watching today. Leave a like, subscribe, and please comment what you thought.
Every video that Ethan edits, it's always like something that I say accidentally, and I'm like, and then he cuts out me saying, "Don't put that in the video." I say, "Ethan, I swear to God, don't put that in," and then it's always in there.